I think I've been at every Pride parade since it started. My friend Maureen and I held the banner at the very first one. She and I, with others, helped organize that first one, and the second one, and the third one. I've been involved with helping to organize probably 20 out of the 30 over the years. The first Pride parades really started in the U.S. In about 1970, 71. And in Canada, I think the first ones must have been about that same time, 73, 74, primarily Toronto, then Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal had some as well. So in some ways, we were, like other medium and smaller sized cities, we were much later to the game. In part of the 80s, we did have Pride Week, and we had some Pride events and Pride picnics. And the thinking was that we didn't think we could pull off a parade, that people would come and march in it, or that people would come and watch a parade.
Pride is always a snapshot of where the community is at any given time. And you go back to the 70s, I mean, Pride was a small number of activists walking through the downtown very quickly, maybe even with their faces masked because they couldn't be out. Certainly in cities across the country, people wanted to march, but marched with paper bags over their heads because they couldn't be outed. I mean, if you were a federal public servant during that time and you went to a Pride parade, you probably lost your job.
I'm not sure what the numbers were, 30 people maybe, or whatever, that marched that particular time. Some people had paper bags over their heads so you couldn't identify them. Maureen and I were at the front, so I kind of forget exactly what others did and didn't do. And of course, we didn't wear anything on our heads at all. Part of the activities that took place in those days was a commemoration of what happened in the Nazi camps, in concentration camps where gays and lesbians were rounded up, and the pink triangle was what they wore. That's the symbol that's been used throughout contemporary history for gays and lesbians. And so we made armbands with them. I remember this is one of them. And that other people did most of the sewing. I wasn't very good at that, but I could wear one.
In the beginning, there were members of our community who wouldn't come out for fear of being discovered, let alone people who aren't part of our community coming out. And now you, as a queer person, can come and march wearing your company logo.
When you have corporations saying, we're putting money in this because we believe in the community, we have people from the LGBTQ community in our own company that want to march. When we have banks, when we have small businesses that are saying, we want to demonstrate our pride because we want our employees to be proud 365 days of the year, and this is the one day we can be public with it, that to me is success.
I think the fact that we were able and that it was possible in both Edmonton and this country at that time to kind of take up the cause and specifically demonstrate, whether it was a rally, whether it was sending letters, whether it was meeting with politicians, all of those things became part of how we tried to move forward. And we're successful. I mean, it wasn't just gays and lesbians by themselves. There were other people that were part of that making it happen.
This is about bringing our allies along. The women's movement didn't exist without allies. We don't have any rights that get extended to people without allies. And so this is all about equipping our allies. And if you're a straight couple that feels totally comfortable to bring your kids out to come and see Pride, that to me is a victory.
In the beginning, there were members of our community who wouldn't come out for fear of being discovered, let alone people who aren't part of our community coming out.
When we did the first one, we didn't know whether anyone else would show up, except those of us that organized it. I was floored that people did come. I was really anxious whether anybody would, but I was amazed that people did. But I could never imagine how it has become today, which I'm delighted with to see. The audiences that go to the parade these days is just incredible, from babies and young kids to people who are probably in their 90s, all walks of life in that too. And that's the part that speaks to me, that's so significant. It's cross demographics and ages and social groups in the city as well. And of course, these days, it's also much more of a celebration. There's a political and there is a remembrance of why this is happening, but it also is much more of a celebration of the community, which I think has been extremely important and very valuable.
It was around grade 10 that I started feeling that I might be gay. I wasn't really sure. I had a lot of really incredible gay and queer and trans friends in high school. I went to an art school, so I was lucky enough to be surrounded by a real diverse group of people. And I think had I not gone to a really awesome high school like that, I probably wouldn't have come out as early as I did. I think it would have taken me a few more years to discover who I was.
My biological sex is female, and I was always very tomboyish, always played with boys mostly. And I used to go home and cry at my mom when I was really young, asking her why I couldn't have been born a boy, because to me, I just wanted to be a boy so bad. And then as I grew up, I just kind of accepted the fact that I wasn't a boy, but I kind of remained in that more masculine presenting side until I reached puberty, where I started having obviously changes in my body and started looking more like a woman. And I felt societal pressure to conform to what being a woman is and femininity. And I always felt like an imposter in my own body. Like it felt like I was performing a role instead of being myself. I would look at other women and it looked so easy for them to just exist, and for me it was like every moment was a struggle. I just didn't understand how they could be so comfortable and appear so natural when for me it was such a struggle.
I was involved with the Gay Straight Alliance at my school, and that really opened the door for a lot of different opportunities for me. I ended up serving on the youth committee for the Edmonton Pride Festival Society, I think in 2011, 2012. And then the next year I went on to be on the board. I started on the board when I was 17, and then I served on the board until recently.
When I was growing up, I didn't know that being attracted to people of the same gender was something that was not going to be an okay thing, or that was not going to be something that would be accepted with my peers, until I knew that it was something that wasn't going to be accepted by my peers, right? And it wasn't, I think, until university when I started meeting other people who were not only out, but out and proud and staking claim in their identity, and having their identity as somewhat of it wasn't just a part of them, it was a huge piece of what gave them confidence and was a huge piece of how they moved through the world.
Every time Pride happens, it's an annual event in most large cities in North America and the world. It's an annual event, but every Pride is going to be someone's first Pride. And I remember thinking back to my first Pride, and holy crap, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. It's just like you're walking on air, you're floating. It's absolutely incredible. And so it needs to continue to exist and continue to get better to meet the needs of our community, our ever-changing community. But it needs to continue to exist because there are people that still need a first Pride.
The first time I marched in Pride last year, it was the best. I was oh my God, this is incredible. Everyone is smiling, everyone is waving a flag, everyone is cheering, everyone, that happy, that love, that peace I found, it was the best.
Get strength from our community. And when you know that there are other people out there that are like you, you feel more confident in being who you are. I still get a lot of the same, if not worse, now as an adult than I did when people suspected I was queer. I just have more tools to deal with it. I feel more secure and confident in myself to deal with it, and I have access to community now to support me when things go sideways. And all of the crap that gets thrown at us doesn't stick so bad. All of the daggers don't dig so deep. It doesn't hurt quite as badly because we know that we have our community there to support us.
I learned so much. I met so many people, and I guess I just learned a lot more about our community and learning a lot about kind of the disparities that exist within our community. And I felt more drawn to advocate for our more marginalized intersections within our community.
I think people need to understand that we are all humans, despite our culture, despite our race, despite what we actually choose to love, what we actually choose to be. The main thing remains that we are all human, and we all need to be respected, and we all need to be ourselves.
We can have discussions, and it's through those discussions that change really happens. If I tell someone, well, you're not allowed to say anything to me because I find it offensive, that doesn't mean they'll stop saying it. It just means that they'll stop saying it to me, and things might just get worse. And if instead I listen to them and I'm like, okay, what's your reasoning behind saying that? What makes you think that that's okay? And let's try and see what's the root cause of it, then maybe we can address it, maybe we can find a common ground, and then maybe that person will leave going home thinking, you know what? That's a human person. And that person was genuine and was nice. Why would I hate that person?
Being able to have honest conversations, but respectful conversations with those who oppress you. It's the hardest way to be, but it's the best way to gain progress.
I feel like that's how change really happens, you know? It's, you need to humanize yourself by humanizing others.
I came to Canada in 1988. I came to Canada as a refugee, and we came from Nicaragua, just had gone through a civil war, and we moved to Calgary, of all places. We didn't know Calgary from any other city in the country. It just happened to be the place that where we ended up. And I ended up moving and living in the same neighborhoods that now make up my constituency, which is kind of cool. And I ended up being a flight attendant for about 15 years. I spoke Spanish, French, Portuguese, Italian, and so they hired me. And I got to see a lot of the world. And one of the things that struck me was how different things were for LGBTQ people in other parts of the world. Like I was going to New York and seeing, that the community was much more open.
I would say, 17 through 20, I was like, I didn't have a girlfriend. Like I was the fat, popular kid because I did drama and I ran for student government. So I've been involved in student government since I was 12. I was like treasurer of my elementary school, and then got involved at high school, ran against the grade 12s when I was in grade 11, was student body president for 2 years, and then decided that the University of Alberta looked interesting. Then about 20, I became student union president. And I started realizing that when a couple was walking down the street, I'd spend more time looking at the guy than the girl. And I remember at the U of A at the time when you had Blue Jeans Day, which was to express solidarity with the LGBTQ community, that's the only day you would see thousands and thousands of people wearing sweats. Because if you wore jeans, it meant you were gay friendly. And the vast majority of the campus wasn't. And I thought I would never be loved, I wouldn't have a job. I would certainly never be in politics if I came out. And so I went deeper in the closet. And even when I went over to Oxford and studied to do philosophy, politics, and economics, the irony is my college, Corpus Christi, was where the LGBTQ group would meet every Thursday. But I couldn't be there because it was too close to my heart. I didn't want to be part of that team. I didn't understand what it meant. And so I carried that around and probably spent 30 to 40% of my mental brain space just trying to put up a straight fiction. So then I set out on a journey to tell all my friends, and then met somebody, and we dated for about 9 years, and then there were 2 really important weddings coming up. My cousins and my brothers. I didn't want to bring that partner as a friend. So I got up the courage and told my parents, and I said, look, when you adopted me, you adopted a gay baby. And then the tears started to flow. And they looked at each other and they smiled, and they said, we knew. I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me? And they said, because you had to be ready to tell us yourself. We've loved you since the day we brought you home, and you are who you are.
I basically became disenchanted with the idea of being in the closet and slowly started to have the conversations with my family and eventually kind of went through this process of coming out, which in all fairness, until I was elected and I was basically burst out of the closet, so to speak, it wasn't something that I actively share with people, right? Very private, and I still am. And slowly, more and more, I just became much more comfortable and much more sure, and then I ended up actually marching in a pride parade for the first time with a bunch of friends. That was very liberating. I think that was one of the happiest days, and not because I was marching, but it was because I was being celebrated for just being in this world. To me, when I was appointed into cabinet, then another level of responsibility was thrust upon me. And I took it with a little bit of hesitation at first, because I thought being the first of anything is always a lot of pressure. But at the same time, it gave me an opportunity to create a space for other people to think of themselves as being potentially candidates in the future. Seeing how you can live a very productive life and contribute to society, be a member of society, and not be held back because of your gender identity or your gender expression.
Gender expression is important, and at the end of the day, it's all about keeping people safe. And we don't have coroner's reports that say suicide due to LGBT. We have suicides, we have youth suicides, we have Indigenous suicides. What we can't tell is the intersections. I mean, if you can't tell someone's sexual orientation, or gender expression or gender identity, and that's the reason why they feel excluded, and they choose to take their own lives, and that's a loss to society.
We can find a common ground and treat each other as human beings, because really when you take away race and gender identity and gender expression and language and religion and all those things, what you're left with is just a basic human being.
For me, Pride is about letting people know that we're here, and letting people know that we're proud of who we are, and letting people know that there's a struggle. I mean, when the community succeeded in getting equal marriage, a lot of people dusted their hands and said, okay, we must be done. And we left trans people behind, and we left queer people of color behind, and we left two-spirited people behind, and Indigenous people who are LGBTQ. And so we have a lot of work to now move together as a community. You don't have to realize who you are and then become a Pride warrior the next day. At some point in your life, that will happen. And so the call to me came when I saw a government nationally that didn't want to have anything to do with the community. And the reason I decided to run for politics is because I wanted to show the rest of the country that Alberta and Edmonton were a lot more progressive than people and our elected officials were giving us credit for.
To me, this province has been the place where I grew up, the place that gave me all the tools that I needed to succeed in life, and it's the place where a gay Hispanic Jew was elected to office, right? So it couldn't possibly be that bastion of conservatism that people make it out to be.
It's an affirmation that says, not only am I an individual, but I'm proud to be who I am. I'm pleased in my own skin. And I think certainly in my generation, and I think still true today, for many people who are gay and lesbian, that oftentimes see themselves that there's something wrong, or there's second class, or why am I like I am, kind of thing. And it's that ability to go, yeah, well, there's a lot of people who are different from each other. That's what makes the world interesting, kind of thing. And that I don't have to be second class.
Pride is seeing yourself, seeing everything about yourself, and seeing how people think it's not good enough, think it's too different, or that it's wrong, and saying, doesn't matter what you think, I love me. That, to me, is what pride is. It's an internal feeling with an external expression.
It means acceptance, it means community, it means perspective. It's a joyful word because of the history that I've experienced. It wasn't always that. It was at one point something that I feared, and now it's something that I've embraced and celebrate. Pride means a celebration of every unique individual just because they are, and nothing more.
No matter how they identify, everyone is unique and has something unique that they bring to the table. And having that day to celebrate diversity in all its shapes and forms and varieties is just absolutely beautiful, and I think is the best way to bring people together.
Pride is awesome, and it lights up, you know, White Ave and like all the businesses and the people and all these kids, and it's just like, yes, but then you leave kind of like sunken and a bit disheartened because you're like, where is this the rest of the year?
If you're not proud, you can't stick up for people that are being marginalized or bullied. If you're not proud, you can't say, we have a right to our rights. If you're not proud, you won't say that LGBTQ rights are human rights and human rights have no borders. And so why do you then work to make sure that people are safe? Well, because you want everybody to be proud. At the end of the day, I mean, there's enough struggle just becoming a person. Just going through puberty to layer on struggles with sexual identity and gender expression and gender identity. I mean, you wouldn't ask for this. So unless it comes from some deep place, like our DNA and our genetics and that we were born this way, you gotta live with it and you gotta be able to be proud. And my gayness is about 6 to 7% of who I am. Like 3% is I'm a bald guy, right? 20 or 50% is I'm francophone. Like I'm non-status adopted Cree. I'm a triathlete in recovery. I'm a member of parliament. I'm a former business person. Like put all the identities together and say, that's what I'm proud of, right? And for one day a year, I get to say, look, I'm queer, I'm here, and don't fear, because that's what we're all about.
Oh, that's easy. Pride, for me, I mean, it's a celebration for many, many out there, and I'm happy they're celebrating. They're celebrating their bodies, they're celebrating their happiness out there, because, you know, for some of them, 364 days of a year, at least on the Pride Parade, they have to hide. Then one day they suddenly, you know, have all their feathers out, and they're celebrating. For me, Pride is defiance. And just like them, they're wearing their tiny speedos and jumping around. I am wearing my Pakistani suit and walking there, and I hold that sign with me always, fear not, Allah loves us all. And if there is one message I want to give out in Pride, it is that message, that no matter who you are, no matter what your sexuality, etc., you're a human being.
Pride to me means the safety and confidence to stand in the truth of who I am. One of the coolest things about being a queer in Alberta is, like, because there seems to be the most opposition, our community, while it might not be as like loud and out there and accessible to every single person, we're so strong. We're so strong and we're so like connected. And you know, like I have community here in Edmonton. I know that if I go down to Calgary, I have community down in Calgary. I know if I go down to Lethbridge, I have community down in Lethbridge. And like, because we're smaller and because we have to be more strong and more connected to survive, we have that like really awesome kind of unique aspect to our community where, you know, we have those personal connections with people that are in different communities like that. So while it might not be as concentrated and as visible, the invisible queers are just as powerful. We're just as strong.